The wind cut sharply through Queens that morning, the kind of cold that seeped beneath coats and into the bones. Lucia Herrera moved quickly down Roosevelt Avenue, her thin scarf fluttering behind her like a torn ribbon. She kept one hand pressed against the strap of her worn backpack, the other tucked into her pocket as she hurried toward the subway. Her shift in Manhattan started in 40 minutes, and the trains were running slow again. They always did when she needed them most. She hated being late. Not because she feared the work, but because being late was dangerous in America. Here, lateness meant being replaceable, disposable. One mistake and someone else, someone with papers, with connections, with a name that sounded American, would take the job without hesitation. Lucia understood this too well. Her life in New York existed on a thread, fragile and invisible, stretched between survival and collapse. She squeezed into the packed 7 train. The smell of damp coats, old coffee, and morning exhaustion surrounded her. A businessman glanced impatiently at his watch. A young mother clutched her daughter's hand. Nobody looked at Lucia. That was normal. She had become an expert in being unseen. As the train rattled underground, she closed her eyes and pictured her mother back in Guatemala. She imagined the cracked walls of their house, the warm smell of masa cooking, her younger brother chasing chickens in the yard. Those memories were both comfort and wound. She had come here to help them, to give them a better life. But lately, between rent, food, and sending money home, she felt like she was drowning. At Grand Central, she switched to the bus that would take her near the corporate tower where she cleaned executive floors. She stepped off and walked briskly, her shoes clicking against the icy pavement. 20 minutes until shift. Enough time if nothing slowed her down. And then something did. As she rounded the corner onto Fifth Avenue, a muffled thud echoed behind her. She turned instinctively. A man lay collapsed on the sidewalk, his body twisted unnaturally, one hand stretched out as if he'd tried to grab something before falling. Blood streaked across his forehead, staining the concrete a dark, almost wine-like red. People walked around him. Some glanced, others didn't bother. New York moved fast. Compassion was a luxury. But Lucia stopped. For a moment, her heart hammered with fear. Helping could bring trouble. Papers might be asked for. Questions could place her at risk. Yet none of that mattered when she saw his chest struggling for air. She knelt beside him. "Senor? Can you hear me?" Her voice trembled, but she forced calm into it. "Stay with me, please." His eyelids fluttered. He looked older than she first thought. Early 40s maybe, dressed in a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Lucia grabbed his cold hand. "You're not alone. I'm here." She called 911, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. While waiting for the ambulance, she gently supported his head, using her own scarf to slow the bleeding. She whispered in Spanish, a lullaby her mother used to sing when she was little, hoping he could feel the comforts even if he didn't understand the words. It took only 8 minutes for help to arrive. But in those 8 minutes, Lucia forgot about time, about her job, about the consequences waiting to swallow her the moment she stood up. She stepped back as the paramedics lifted the man onto the stretcher. One of them nodded to her. "You did good. Most people just keep walking." Lucia returned the nod faintly, her hands trembling. She looked down at her scarf in the paramedic Sayas' hands, now soaked with another person's blood. There was no getting it back. She didn't ask. The ambulance doors closed, sirens rising into the cold morning air. Only then did Lucia look at the time. 20 minutes past her shift start. Her stomach dropped. She ran. Down the sidewalk, through the crosswalk, weaving between pedestrians, her breath burning in her throat. The corporate tower's mirrored windows reflected her frantic figure as she reached the employee entrance, pushing through the revolving door with a surge of desperation. Inside, the marble lobby gleamed under sterile white lights. Executives floated past her, polished and perfumed. Lucia kept her head down as she rushed to the staff elevators, hoping, praying that her supervisor hadn't noticed her absence yet. But when the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, her supervisor was waiting. Amanda Shaw, tall, rigid, with blonde hair pulled so tight it made her eyes look permanently narrowed. She didn't shout. Amanda never wasted her voice. She preferred precision, the cold efficiency of a knife. "You're late," Amanda said, her tone flat, emotionless. There was an emergency," Lucia panted. "A man fell. He was bleeding. I stayed until the ambulance." Amanda raised a hand. "Stop. I don't need excuses." Lucia's heart thudded painfully. "Please, I've never been late before. I helped someone who could have died." "And yet," Amanda replied, folding her arms, "you were not here. The floors were not cleaned on time. Mr. Yates noticed dust in the conference room." "Dust, Lucia?" For a moment the words didn't compute. Dust. She had saved a man's life, and here she stood being scolded over dust. "Amanda," Lucia whispered, "this company cannot operate with unreliable staff. You're dismissed." Lucia felt the ground tilt. "Fired? No. No, please. It's final. Leave your badge with security." Her vision blurred. The hallway, once glossy and sharp, now looked like it was underwater. People had stopped to watch. Their eyes slid over her with detached curiosity, like she was a disturbance they hoped would pass quickly. Lucia swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together. She opened her mouth to plead again, but stopped. She saw in Amanda's cold, unblinking expression that there was no mercy to be found. She walked out, each step heavier than the last, until she reached the street again. The sunlight felt cruel, too bright, too indifferent. Her breath came out in small clouds as she stood on the sidewalk, the same type of sidewalk where the man had fallen. She wondered if helping him had been fate, or a mistake she couldn't afford to make. Her hands shook as she wrapped her coat tighter around herself. The city roared around her, cars, voices, sirens, yet she felt unbearably alone. She didn't know that somewhere across town, in a hospital bed, the man she had saved would soon wake up, and he would remember her. Not her face, not her name, but the warmth of her voice and the way her hand had held his, as if she were guarding him from the darkness. She had changed the course of his life without knowing it, and he, in turn, was about to change hers in ways she could never imagine. The world returned to Elias Warren in fragments, light first, thin and harsh, cutting through the fog in his mind, then the sterile disinfectant smell of a hospital room, a rhythmic beeping that pulsed like a distant metronome. He tried to move, but pain flared across his forehead, sharp and immediate, anchoring him back to the bed. For a long moment, he couldn't remember why he was there. His thoughts slid away like loose pages in a storm. Then, slowly, memory stitched itself back together. The sidewalk, the sudden dizziness, the cold reaching up to meet him. But most of all, someone's voice, soft, steady, a melody in a language he didn't recognize but felt safe in, and a hand holding his, warm despite the winter air. He swallowed. Where is she?" His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. A nurse looked up from her chart. "Mr. Warren, you're awake. That's good. How do you feel?" He ignored the question. There was a woman with me." The nurse blinked, confused. "A woman? No one came in with you. The paramedics brought you alone." "No," Elias murmured. "She stayed. She kept talking so I wouldn't pass out." His hand curled unconsciously, as if trying to hold on to the memory. "She helped me." The nurse offered a polite smile. "Maybe someone who saw you fall, but we don't have her name." Her words slipped past him like meaningless noise. He stared at the ceiling, feeling an ache, not just physical but something deeper, like a bruise forming in his chest. He didn't understand why it mattered so much. He'd built a life out of distance, from people, from connection, from anything that could disrupt the rigid walls he'd constructed around himself. But that voice, that warmth, it had pierced through all of it. The next day, his assistant arrived, carrying a laptop and a stack of documents that Elias was in no condition to read. "Sir, you don't need to worry about the meetings this week. We've postponed everything." Elias didn't care about the meetings. "Find her." His assistant blinked in confusion. "Find? Who, sir?" "The woman who helped me before the ambulance arrived. I need to know who she is." There was a flicker of concern in the assistant's expression. Elias was known for speaking emotionally about anything. Numbers and contracts were his terrain, not people. "We can request security footage from the street cameras. I'll see what we can gather." Elias nodded and leaned back against the pillows, feeling the fatigue seep into him. He didn't know what he wanted to say to her. He just knew he needed to. 2 days later, Lucia stared at her phone inside the cramped laundromat, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like tired insects. She'd spent the last hours searching for new jobs, sending messages, hoping for a miracle. But every reply was the same. Position filled, not hiring, must have valid documentation. Some didn't reply at all. She was down to her last week of rent. Her hands trembled as she folded warm clothes fresh from the dryer, each movement mechanical. The smell of detergent should have been comforting, familiar from her childhood, but now it carried the weight of fear. She blinked back tears, swallowing the frustration lodged in her throat. She had made sacrifices to come here, endured loneliness, humiliation, all to keep her family alive. And yet life seemed to push her further into a corner. She didn't notice the door open, didn't look up as footsteps approached. "Excuse me," a man said gently. Lucia turned and froze. She recognized him instantly. Even without the blood, without the chaos, his eyes were unmistakable, deep-set, intelligent, carrying both fragility and strength. His coat looked expensive, yet he stood with a slight hesitance, as if unsure of his place in the room. "You," she whispered, stepping back. Her heart pounded in alarm. "You shouldn't be here. You need to rest." "I'm fine," he said softly. "Better because of you." Lucia glanced around nervously. The laundromat was nearly empty, but fear coiled in her stomach like a tightening knot. Encounters with wealthy men rarely meant anything good for women like her. "Why are you here?" she asked, pulling her hands together protectively. Elias took a slow breath. "To thank you." She stared at him, stunned. "You stayed with me," he continued. "You didn't walk away. You didn't leave me alone on that sidewalk. You saved my life." Lucia shook her head. "I only did what anyone would—" "No," Elias interrupted gently. "Most people wouldn't, but you did." There was sincerity in his voice, raw and unpolished. She felt herself soften, but only for a moment. Reality was heavier than sentiment. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," she said. "I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" he repeated, confused. Lucia's eyes dropped to the floor. "I was fired because of what happened." Elias's expression shifted, surprise, then anger. "Fired? For helping someone who was injured?" "For being late," she whispered. "They didn't want to hear why." His jaw tightened. "That's unacceptable." "It's my life," she said with a tired shrug. "This is how things go." "Then let me help you," he said. Lucia stiffened. "No." "Why not?" "Because there's always something in exchange," she said, lifting her chin. "People like you don't help people like me without a reason." Her words stung, but not because they were wrong, because they were true. He had lived his entire life surrounded by people who expected something from him. Money, influence, connection. No one had ever looked at him and seen a man first. "I don't want anything from you," he said quietly, "except the chance to repay a debt I feel deeply." She hesitated, torn between caution and the faint spark of hope flickering inside her. What are you offering? She asked finally. Elias drew in a breath as if choosing his words carefully. Come work for me. Temporarily. I need an assistant while I recover. Someone I trust. Someone who doesn't treat me like a walking bank account. Lucia stared at him in disbelief. Me? Assist? You? He nodded. I can pay well, and you wouldn't be doing anything inappropriate. I'm offering you a job, nothing more. Lucia's heart raced. It sounded impossible, foolish, dangerous. But she felt something in him, an honesty she wasn't used to from men with his kind of power. I don't know, she whispered. Please, Elias said softly. Let me do at least one good thing with the life you helped save. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her future was collapsing like sand slipping between fingers. She had no job, no stability, no options. And yet, something instinctual told her that accepting would change everything, maybe too much. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost inaudible. I'll try. Elias exhaled with visible relief. Then we begin tomorrow. I'll send a car. She shook her head quickly. No car. I'll come by train. He smiled, small, warm, the kind of smile that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. Then I'll send you the address. He turned to leave, pausing only once as if he wanted to say more. But he simply nodded and stepped out into the cold. Lucia stood alone, her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. She didn't know what she had just agreed to. She didn't know who he really was. And she didn't know that the path she'd just stepped onto would blur the lines between gratitude and destiny, between duty and desire, between the life she had and the life that waited for her in the shadows of wealth and vulnerability. All she knew was that tomorrow, everything would begin to change. The next morning, the city felt different to Lucia, as if the air itself held its breath. She stood on the train platform gripping the address Elias had texted her. The letters looked foreign, belonging to a world she'd never imagined stepping into. A penthouse with a view of the skyline, a place where the air smelled of polished wood and quiet money instead of bleach and overworked bodies. The train rattled into Manhattan, and Lucia pressed her forehead to the window, trying to steady her breathing. What was she doing? She didn't belong in the orbit of men like him, men who could reshape futures with a signature, men who lived behind tinted glass and layers of protection. But she didn't belong anywhere else either, not anymore. When she reached the building, she stopped at the entrance, unable to move. It towered into the sky like a monument carved from steel. The lobby glowed with marble and soft amber lights. A doorman watched her approach with polite suspicion, as if unsure whether she was lost. Her clothes suddenly felt too simple, her boots too scuffed. I'm here to see Mr. Warren, she managed, her voice tight. The man checked a list. Name? Lucia Herrera. Something shifted in his posture. He stepped back respectfully and pressed a button to open the door. He's been expecting you. The elevator ride felt endless, a silent ascent into a life she was terrified to touch. When the doors opened, she stepped into a private foyer where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the stretch of Manhattan in sharp winter light. It stole her breath. Elias stood near the windows, hands in his pockets, wearing a soft gray sweater instead of his expensive coat. He looked healthier than he did in the laundromat, though a faint bruise still marked his forehead. When he turned and saw her, something softened in his expression, something gentle, something almost relieved. You came, he said. I said I would, she replied, though her voice trembled. If you still want me here. I do, Elias said, and his tone carried no hesitation. Come in, please. She walked slowly into the room, afraid her footsteps might somehow stain the floor. Elias noticed her tension and gave space between them, as if he understood the weight pushing down on her shoulders. I want to be clear, he said. I didn't bring you here to work as a housekeeper. I want you as my assistant, scheduling, basic tasks, helping with day-to-day things while I recover. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you can walk away. No consequences. Lucia nodded, unable to fully trust the promise but wanting to. He handed her a folder. Your salary, hours, everything is in there. I made sure it's fair. I won't exploit you. The word struck her. Men like him weren't supposed to use words like that. Not with her, not with someone from her world. She looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his eyes. I don't know anything about this kind of work, she admitted quietly. I know, he said. That's why I'll teach you. Her tasks at first were simple. Organizing medication times, responding to emails he dictated, helping him move around the penthouse when dizziness struck. But slowly, the work changed. Elias began asking her opinion about which meetings to prioritize, which partnerships to pursue, which employees seemed trustworthy.
It confused her. Why are you asking me? I don't know anything about business. I don't need business answers, he said. I have enough people telling me what I want to hear. I need honesty, and you don't lie. The truth of that startled her. She hadn't realized that sincerity could be a skill. Days turned into weeks. Lucia grew more comfortable enough to walk through the penthouse without shrinking into herself. She learned small habits of his, how he drank coffee only when he felt overwhelmed, how he touched the scar near his hairline when he was thinking, how he softened whenever she entered a room, even if he tried not to show it. One evening, a storm rolled over the city. Rain streaked the windows like silver threads, the thunder echoing in the distance. Elias sat on the sofa with his laptop open but untouched. Lucia brought him tea, placing it gently beside him. You don't have to, he murmured. It's raining, she replied. People should drink something warm when it rains. He smiled faintly. Is that a Guatemalan rule? A mother rule, she corrected with a soft laugh. The laugh caught him off guard. His eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. The flicker of emotion in his expression made her pulse quicken. She looked away, suddenly aware of the fragile boundary between them. You miss her, he said quietly. Lucia nodded. Every day. She thinks I'm living well here, that everything is easier than it is. And what do you think? He asked. Lucia stared out the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. I think I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being invisible. Tired of feeling like I owe this country more than it will ever let me have. Elias closed the laptop. J'aurais not impossible Lucia. The words vibrated in the air like a confession, though neither of them named what it truly meant. She felt her throat tighten. No one had ever said that to her, not a boss, not a landlord, not anyone in this city. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Elias stood slowly, walking to the window beside her. Their reflections hovered side by side in the glass so improbable together that it seemed almost poetic. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why did you stay with me? On the sidewalk. Lucia hesitated. Because I know what it feels like to need help and have no one stop. His eyes softened. You saved me. You saved me first, she murmured, with the job. He shook his head. That isn't what I meant. Silence thickened between them. A silence that felt alive, charged, waiting for one of them to breathe the truth neither dared to speak. But then a sharp blast of thunder broke the moment. Lucia stepped back, heart racing, as if she'd been standing too close to something dangerous. "I should prepare your evening medication," she said quickly. Elias didn't stop her, but his gaze followed her as she walked away filled with something aching and unspoken. That night, long after her shift ended, Lucia lay awake on her narrow bed in Queens, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the moment by the window, the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with gratitude, but with something deeper, something fragile, something like longing. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. This was not part of the plan. She was here to survive, not to feel feelings, made people like her weak in a world that demanded hardness. But no matter how she tried to bury the truth, it rose in her like a tide. She was beginning to care for him, and that terrified her more than any danger she'd faced in America. Because love between worlds like theirs was not just forbidden, it was impossible, or so she believed. What she didn't know was that in his penthouse above the city, Elias sat awake too, touching the bruise on his forehead and thinking of her voice on the sidewalk. And he wondered, with equal fear, how could he fall for someone whose world he'd never been allowed to touch?
The following weeks unfolded like a strange dream for Lucia, slow, delicate, and quietly dangerous. She arrived each morning to find Elias waiting, not with commands, but with conversation. He asked about her childhood, about Guatemala, about the food she missed and the music she grew up hearing. No one in New York had ever asked her those things. Most people didn't ask because they didn't care. But Elias listened, genuinely, as if her stories were pieces of a world he'd never been brave enough to imagine. Their rhythm grew effortless. He walked more steadily now, the dizziness fading, though he often let her steady him with a hand on his arm. Sometimes she wondered if he truly needed the support, or if he simply wanted an excuse to feel her near. One afternoon, as she organized documents on his desk, he stood behind her, reading through notes she'd typed. She felt him before she heard him, the warmth of his presence, the faint scent of cedar, and something subtle, like books kept in sunlight. Her breath caught. "You have a gift," he said softly. "For typing?" she joked awkwardly, trying to break the tension that seemed to bind the air around them. "For clarity," he replied, "for seeing through the noise. You simplify things that other people try to complicate." She lowered her gaze. "Maybe because my life never allowed space for complicated." His voice softened. "And yet you carry so much complexity inside you." Their eyes met. Something in him flickered, gentle, searching, dangerously close to affection. Lucia stepped back, pretending to check the shelves. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't afford the kind of vulnerability that came from wanting something she could not have. But want did not care about logic. It grew inside her quietly, like a seed pushing through cracks in concrete. That evening, a snowstorm swept over the city. Flakes drifted past the windows like tiny sparks. The penthouse felt warmer than usual, filled with the hush of white noise and the occasional soft crackle from the fireplace Elias had lit, a rare gesture of comfort in a home that often felt too pristine to breathe in. Lucia finished preparing his tea and turned to find him standing at the edge of the room, watching her with an unreadable expression. "You don't have to stay so late," he said. "It's just snow," she replied. "I'll be fine." He hesitated, then walked toward her. "I worry about you traveling alone at night, especially in weather like this." She almost smiled. "I've crossed deserts and borders, Elias. A little snow is nothing. His expression darkened slightly, not with anger, but with the pain of imagining the risks she'd taken to get here. You shouldn't have had to do that, he murmured. It was the only way. He looked at her then with a depth that made her chest tighten. You deserve a life that doesn't demand so much suffering. The words struck something inside her. She had heard promises before, empty vows from people who wanted to rescue her only to take something in return. But Elias wasn't promising anything. He was simply acknowledging the truth, offering compassion with no expectation. I don't know what I deserve, she whispered. You deserve peace, he said. Care, safety. She swallowed hard. People like me don't get things like that. Elias took a step closer, and for the first time, he didn't hide the emotion in his eyes. Maybe you do now. The world stilled. Lucia's breath trembled. She felt the gravity pulling them closer, the invisible tether that had been forming since the morning she found him on the sidewalk. She wanted to step toward him, to close the distance. She wanted to feel something warm in a life that had always been cold, but fear was louder. I should go, she said abruptly. He blinked, surprised. Lucia! No, she said, her voice tight. If I stay, I might forget who I am, and I can't forget that. Not here, not in this country. Her voice trembled, revealing more than she intended. Elias didn't move toward her, though she saw the impulse flicker across his features. Instead, he lowered his gaze, giving her the space she desperately needed. I don't want you to lose yourself, he said softly. I only want you to be seen, truly seen. She turned away before the tears could rise. She grabbed her coat with shaking hands and hurried toward the elevator. But before she stepped inside, his voice reached her. I'm falling in love with you, Lucia. Her heart stopped. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The truth of his confession settled like a flame inside her, bright, impossible, and terrifying. You can't, she whispered. The elevator doors closed. The train ride back to Queens felt unreal. Snow blurred the windows, and the hum of the tracks drowned beneath the roar of her thoughts. He can't love me. Not because he wasn't sincere. He was. Too sincere, too raw, too unguarded for a man of his status. But love between their worlds didn't survive. She had seen it destroy people. She had seen it turn hope into ruin. And yet, she could still feel the echo of his words in her chest. When she returned home, the heater in her room clanked loudly, struggling to warm the freezing air. Lucia sat on the edge of her bed, removing her coat slowly. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady the tears she had been holding back. She wanted him. She wanted the softness in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, the man beneath the wealth who looked at her as if she were the only person who had ever truly seen him. But wanting was dangerous. In America, an immigrant woman couldn't afford desires. Desire clouded judgment. Desire made you take risks you weren't allowed to take. She curled onto her side, the thin blanket barely warming her. The snowstorm outside howled against the building, but inside her chest was a quieter storm, one she didn't know how to escape. The next morning, she expected Elias to withdraw, to regret his confession, to return to the polished, distant persona he wore like armor. But he didn't. He greeted her gently, cautiously, as if afraid that any wrong word might send her running again. He kept his distance physically, but emotionally he was open, honest in a way that both comforted and frightened her. During lunch, he paused his work and looked at her with careful sincerity. I don't expect anything from you, he said. Not love, not promises. I don't want you to feel pressured. I just needed you to know what's true for me. Her throat tightened. Elias, you don't understand what this could mean for me, for us. People talk, they judge, they twist things. I don't care what people say. I do, she said firmly, because I'm the one they will blame. Women like me always get blamed. He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the truth in her words. When he opened them again, There was something like resolve. "Then I'll protect you," he said. "You can't protect me from everything." "No," he admitted, "but I can stand beside you if you let me." Her heartbeat thudded painfully. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who was lonely, who had lived behind walls money couldn't break, a man who had tasted death and woken searching for her voice, a man who didn't love her out of pity, but out of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something real. Lucia didn't answer. She couldn't, but she didn't walk away. And that small, trembling choice shifted the ground beneath both of them. Because love, once spoken, could not be unsaid. And theirs had just begun to bloom in the shadows of fear, in the silent spaces between two hearts that were never meant to touch, but now couldn't let go. Spring arrived quietly, melting the last traces of winter from the city streets. For Lucia, the world seemed suspended between two truths, the life she had always known and the one slowly forming around her like a fragile dawn. Her bond with Elias grew in ways neither of them dared name. They didn't touch, not even by accident. They didn't speak of love again. But love lived between them, silent, patient, undeniable. The shift became clear the morning she walked into the penthouse and found Elias waiting with 2 cups of café con leche. The drink she once mentioned reminded her of Guatemala. He had made it himself, awkwardly, too much foam, not enough sugar, but the gesture softened something inside her that had been rigid for years. "You remembered?" she whispered. "I remember everything you tell me," he replied. Her pulse trembled. She accepted the cup, careful not to let their fingers brush. Even a touch felt like it would shatter the delicate boundary she clung to. As weeks passed, Elias's recovery neared its end. He moved through the penthouse with confidence, handling meetings in person, taking calls with the crisp authority he had been known for long before he collapsed on that sidewalk. But something about him had changed. The arrogance people once accused him of was replaced with humility, with gentleness. He no longer looked like a man made of glass and steel, but one made of flesh, tender, imperfect, real. Yet the rest of the world did not change with him. Rumors began, quiet whispers from his staff, questions disguised as small talk, curious glances from colleagues who noticed he depended on Lucia more than anyone else. He ignored it all, but Lucia felt every stare like a blade. One afternoon, after a board meeting, Elias returned visibly tense. Lucia recognized the expression, a coil of frustration wrapped in something darker. "What happened?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Someone implied that you're only here because of something personal." Her cheeks burned. "I knew this would happen. It shouldn't have," he said sharply. Then softening, "I told them to mind their own business." "That won't stop them," she murmured. "When a woman like me stands next to a man like you, they will always assume the worst." "A woman like you," he echoed, stepping closer. "Lucia, stop saying that as if you're less." Her throat tightened. "I'm undocumented, poor. I clean houses. I live in a room the size of your bathroom. If people think you care about me, they'll say, 'I'm here for your money.'" "Are you?" he asked quietly, not with doubt, but with sorrow. She shook her head, eyes glistening. "You know I'm not." He nodded. "Then nothing else matters." But it did, to her, to the fragile life she was trying to build. The breaking point came a week later. Lucia arrived to find Elias arguing with a woman in the foyer, tall, elegant, wrapped in a designer coat. Her voice was sharp enough to cut stone. "I'm telling you, Elias, the board is furious. You cannot be seen parading some employee around the office. It's unprofessional." Lucia froze. The woman turned, eyes sweeping over her with cold disdain. "Is this her?" Elias stepped protectively between them. "Victoria, don't! Oh, come on, it's obvious. She's young, pretty, vulnerable, exactly your type." Lucia flinched as if struck. "Victoria!" Elias snapped. But the damage was done. The words carved themselves into Lucia's skin. "This isn't about her," Victoria continued. "It's about you. You're the CEO of Warren Global. You can't risk everything for—" "Enough," Elias said with quiet fury. "Get out." Victoria scoffed, flicking her gaze over Lucia one last time before leaving. The elevator swallowed her, and silence filled the room like smoke. Lucia stood rooted to the floor. Shame burned through her like acid. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Elias said, turning toward her. "No," she said, stepping back. "You shouldn't be defending me like that. I'm not defending you. I'm defending the truth." "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "People have already decided who I am. I don't care what people think." "But I do," she cried, her voice cracking, "because it's always me who pays the price. Not them, not you, me." The words echoed through the penthouse. Elias took a step forward, his voice soft. "Lucia, look at me." She did, and saw the depth of his love, unguarded, unhidden. "I would choose you," he said, "every time, over them, over this company, over everything." She felt her heart split open. "No," she whispered, "don't say that. It's the truth. It can't be. Why?" "Because I don't belong in your world," she said, tears spilling freely now. "And you don't belong in mine." A shattered silence stretched between them. "Maybe we could belong together," he said. She shook her head. "Not like this." And with that she turned away, running before he could stop her. For 2 days she didn't go to work. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from Elias, each one gentler and more desperate than the last. She read them all but couldn't bring herself to respond. She needed space to breathe, to think, to reclaim the parts of herself she feared she was losing. On the third day, as she sat in her tiny room staring at the cracked ceiling, a thought came to her, quiet, steady, undeniable. She could not remain in this limbo. She could not cling to fear forever. She had spent her entire life surviving. But maybe it was time to live. She got dressed and took the train, not to the penthouse, but to a small office space she had seen for rent weeks ago, the kind of place she once thought she could never afford. Her hands trembled as she spoke to the leasing agent, asking questions, taking notes. She didn't have money, but she had courage, and courage, she realized, was a currency too. Afterward, with her heart hammering, she finally texted Elias. "We need to talk." He responded instantly. "Come." She didn't. She asked him to come to Queens. An hour later, his car pulled up beside the cracked sidewalk outside her building. He stepped out, looking out of place among the graffiti and broken windows, but his eyes softened the moment he saw her. "You came," he said gently. "I was never running from you," she whispered. "I was running from the fear of losing myself." Elias stepped closer. "Then don't." She took a deep breath. "I want to start something, a business, my own cleaning company, a real one, with employees who are treated with dignity, with fair pay, with safety." His expression brightened, hope rising behind his eyes like sunrise. "Lucia, that's incredible. I can do it," she said, voice shaking with belief now. "But I need help, not as a woman you love, as a partner, as someone you believe in." Elias nodded slowly. "I can invest, but only if it's what you want." "It is." Emotion tightened his throat. "Then I'm with you, all the way." Lucia looked into his eyes, seeing the man she had saved, the man who saved her back, not with money, but with hope. "I'm not ready to be yours," she whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time." "I'll wait," he said. "No expectations, no pressure." "None," he promised. "And you cannot lose yourself either." He smiled. "I won't. Not if you're beside me." For the first time she reached out and took his hand, softly, trembling, but certain. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a surrender. It was a beginning. A year later, Lucia stood in front of her first commercial building, Herrera Services, the letters shining against the morning sun. She had 20 employees, all immigrants, all protected, all paid more than she ever dreamed of earning herself. She had contracts with major corporations, including the one that had once fired her without mercy. She didn't need to be a millionaire to feel rich, but she was becoming one anyway, slowly, steadily, through work that honored her past, instead of erasing it. Behind her, Elias approached, holding 2 cups of café con leche. "You remembered," she teased. "I remember everything you tell me," he said. She smiled. A real one. Soft, open. Their fingers brushed, intentionally this time. Not everything was perfect. Not everything was certain. But she was no longer invisible. She was becoming. And beside her stood the man who had seen her before the world ever would.